The stars flickered like distant candles as Captain Varek of the Androsian fleet stood at the helm of his sleek warship, the Havoc, staring down at the human territory below. His breath was slow, deliberate, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. For years, they had kept their distance from Earth and its expanding colonies, fearing the unpredictable nature of its inhabitants. Yet, here he was, preparing for the final confrontation. The Havoc's bridge was silent, save for the low hum of the ship's engines. Around him, the crew, fierce, loyal, and meticulously trained, waited for his command. But the air was thick with unease, a feeling no one could quite shake. It wasn't just the unknown, it was the human legend. "We've reached the perimeter of human space," Captain, Lieutenant Alara said, her voice steady but tight with apprehension. "Are you certain this is the course of action?" Varek turned slowly, his cold eyes locking onto hers. He could see the doubt in her expression, the unspoken question, was this the right call? It was a question even Varek had wrestled with for days. The reports had come in, reports of a species that had turned the galaxy upside down in a matter of years. They were becoming a threat too large to ignore. Yet, something about the humans unsettled him. "Pull the fleet back," Varek ordered, his voice carrying authority. "We wait for their move." The crew's murmurs of approval faded into the shadows of the bridge. Alara hesitated but nodded, preparing to relay the command. However, before she could do so, the communications officer's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Earth." Varek's chest tightened. No one had dared to make contact with the Androsian fleet in over a century. Yet here they were, making the first move. Without hesitation, he signaled for the transmission to be broadcasted across the ship. A projection flickered to life in the center of the room, showing a human figure clad in a simple uniform, their features clear but unreadable. The man, human, undeniably, stood with an air of calm, unflinching despite the vast Androsian warships that loomed on his sensors. He spoke, his voice low but piercing. "This is Commander Rook of the Earth Defense Forces," the human said, his expression steady. "I represent humanity's warning, you will not leave. No one returns from human territory." A chill ran down Varek's spine. The words were delivered with such finality, such unshakable certainty, that for a moment, even he doubted his resolve. The legends of human tenacity, their merciless survival instincts, flooded his thoughts. It wasn't a warning, it was a declaration. The threat was real. And yet, the audacity to speak so boldly. "Is that a challenge?" Varek muttered under his breath, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "It's a promise," Rook replied, his voice unwavering. "We don't surrender. We don't back down. We fight." The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Varek stood motionless, his mind racing. No one had ever spoken to him like that. And no one had ever dared to challenge the might of the Androsian fleet. "They are brave," Alara said quietly, the admiration in her voice unmistakable. "But foolish. We'll crush them, Captain." Varek's gaze darkened. "Underestimate them, and we will be the ones who fall." He turned, his mind already working through the strategies. The humans had a reputation for their unexpected tactics, their ability to defy odds. But they were also impulsive, volatile. Such raw potential, if managed correctly, could be a devastating weapon. "Prepare for combat readiness," Varek said, his voice sharp. "But remain cautious. We'll give them one chance to back down. If they don't, we'll make sure they regret it." The Havoc's engines roared to life as the ship advanced toward the human borders, the fleet following in formation. Varek's heart beat steadily in his chest. This wasn't just a battle, it was a war for survival. And Varek would not be the one to blink first. Commander Valen stood atop the observation deck of Vigilance, the human flagship, watching the vast expanse of space. His fingers tightened around the rail as the first shots were fired, an explosive, blinding flash against the endless dark. The enemy had come. The Vigilance's crew scrambled, the hum of machinery mixing with the chaos of alarms ringing throughout the ship. But to Valen, it was a cold certainty, one that he had expected. The Androsian fleet, proud and relentless, had launched their assault on humanity's first true border. He had seen it coming for weeks. "Captain, they're deploying bombers," Lieutenant Kara reported from behind him. Her voice remained even, but Valen could hear the undertone of concern. "Deploy the fighters," Valen commanded, his tone cutting through the air. "We'll meet them head-on. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." Kara nodded and relayed the orders as Valen took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. It was all happening so fast, too fast, perhaps. There was no time for doubt, only action. The human forces had barely managed to secure a foothold on the front lines, and now the stakes had risen. "Sir, the Androsian fleet is moving faster than expected," Lieutenant Trent's voice crackled through the comms. "They've already breached the outer defense grid." Valen's heart rate quickened. He had anticipated this, an overwhelming display of alien firepower, but it still hit him like a physical blow. These were not just aliens, they were invaders, determined to wipe humanity from the galaxy. And this battle, this moment, could decide the fate of every colony, every last human survivor. He glanced at his crew, each face hardened with resolve, but none without the weight of uncertainty. None of them had ever faced an enemy like this. The Androsians were methodical, technologically advanced, and relentless. They would strike fast, overwhelming humanity's defenses, and if Valen and his team didn't act swiftly, the fight would be over before it began. "Captain," Kara's voice broke through his thoughts, urgent. "We've got a breach in the forward starboard shield. The fighters aren't going to hold off the bombers for long." "Then we won't hold off for long, either," Valen muttered, eyes narrowing. "Prepare the countermeasures. This battle isn't about holding ground, it's about sending a message. We will not be erased." A surge of energy coursed through Valen as he turned to face the forward view once more. The human fleet was outnumbered, but there was one thing the Androsians didn't account for: humanity's resourcefulness. For centuries, humans had survived by improvising, by adapting. They didn't have the luxury of relying on superior numbers or overwhelming power. They fought with grit, with every ounce of their being. The first wave of Androsian bombers descended, sleek and fast, their weapons primed. Valen's hand shot out, slamming against the comms panel. "Launch counterstrike. Now." The Vigilance lurched as its weapons systems activated. Bright beams of energy shot toward the incoming bombers, the vastness of space lighting up with their collisions. But the Androsians were as relentless as the humans were stubborn. The bombers weaved through the fire, their advanced shields absorbing much of the human retaliation. A few fell, but for every one that exploded in a fiery plume, two more took its place. "Sir!" Kara's voice rang out again, but this time, it was more than just concern. "They've launched the ground invasion force. Their landing ships are already entering the atmosphere. They're coming for the colonies." Valen's jaw clenched. He had expected a fight in space, but a ground invasion? It meant the Androsians were prepared to wipe out everything in their path, every last human in their way. "Then we'll make sure they know they've made a mistake," Valen said through gritted teeth. "Alert all commanders. We fight for every inch. No retreat. No surrender." The deck beneath Valen's feet shook as Vigilance made a sharp turn, dodging an incoming missile. The ship rocked again, this time with a violent tremor that nearly threw him off his feet. He staggered but regained his balance in a heartbeat, determination burning in his chest. "Prepare for landing operations," Valen barked, his eyes locked on the planet below. "The battle's not over yet. Not by a long shot." As the first wave of human forces began their descent, Valen's mind raced. This was humanity's defining moment. The Androsians may have come with superior strength, but they hadn't yet faced what humans could endure. They hadn't yet felt the rage of a species that had been pushed to the brink. And in this moment, humanity would make its stand. The crew moved swiftly, each knowing their role in this desperate, final push. Outside, the space battle raged on, while below, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Valen didn't just want victory. He needed it. The galaxy had underestimated them once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The ground shook beneath Valen's boots as the Vigilance blasted through the atmosphere, streaking toward the desolate war zone below. The ship's lights flickered in time with the rumbles, an omen of the chaos awaiting them on the surface. He tightened his grip on the console, his thoughts as fragmented as the turbulence outside. "They're relentless," Kara muttered from beside him, her face lit by the flashing readouts. "We've already lost 2 outposts in the past 3 hours." Valen's jaw tightened. Every report they'd received was worse than the last. The Androsians were pushing forward, fast and brutal, with no sign of slowing. Their ground troops had already breached the first line of defense, a series of fortified cities that had taken humanity decades to build. And now, the human forces were scattered, outnumbered, and cornered, but they weren't giving up. "We fight to the last," Valen growled, his eyes scanning the horizon as the warship began its final descent. "No one gets left behind." A sharp beep interrupted their conversation, the display flashing red. "We've got incoming missiles," Trent's voice crackled over the comms. "They're targeting the secondary transport pod." Valen's heart skipped a beat. If the pod was hit, the soldiers and vital supplies it carried would be wiped out in an instant. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Can we intercept?" Valen asked, his fingers already hovering over the control panel. "We're too close," Kara answered, her voice tinged with panic. "We'll take the hit." "No." Valen's command was firm. "Activate the emergency thrusters. We're not losing anyone on my watch." With a deep rumble, the ship lurched as the thrusters ignited, sending the Vigilance into a sharp turn. The missile barrage exploded behind them, the shockwave rattling the hull. Valen held his breath, praying that the maneuver had been enough. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the ship's engines and the crew's strained breaths. Then, the comms crackled to life again. "We're clear," Trent reported, a note of relief in his voice. Valen exhaled, but his mind didn't ease. They had dodged one bullet, but there were still countless more to face. The ship's descent slowed as they neared the ground, the landscape below a patchwork of scorched earth and crumbling fortifications. The once vibrant cities of Earth had become desolate battlefields, their towering skyscrapers now little more than rubble and ash. The Androsians had left their mark, and humanity was fighting to reclaim what was left. Valen gritted his teeth. The Androsians might have the advantage of numbers, but they underestimated something fundamental about humans, their will to fight. "Prepare for drop," Valen ordered as the Vigilance's landing gear locked into place. "We need to establish a foothold before reinforcements arrive." As the door to the transport pod hissed open, a gust of hot, acrid wind rushed in. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and the unmistakable tang of iron. The battlefield was a no-man's land, littered with debris and bodies, both human and alien. A familiar voice echoed through Valen's earpiece. "Commander, this is Sergeant Blake. We've got hostile forces 500 meters to the west. They're setting up a stronghold." "We're on our way," Valen replied, his gaze hardened. "Stay sharp, Sergeant." The soldiers in the transport pod filed out, weapons raised. Valen led the charge, the weight of his armor heavy on his shoulders, but the determination in his chest far greater. The humans were outnumbered, but their fury would not be quenched. The soldiers advanced, moving swiftly through the remnants of the city. Each corner they turned, each building they passed, felt like a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. The Androsians had come to conquer, but they would soon learn what it meant to face humanity's wrath. "Keep moving!" Valen barked as gunfire erupted from the enemy's position. The Androsians had dug in deep, but their defenses were nothing compared to what humanity had endured in the past. "Push forward!" Blake yelled, leading his squad into the fray. The sounds of battle intensified, the sharp cracks of gunfire blending with the roar of artillery in the distance. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there was something unmistakable about the way the humans fought. They fought with a ferocity, an urgency, that only comes when everything is on the line. Valen dove behind a crumbling wall as enemy fire rang out around him. He could hear the screams of the wounded, the crash of debris falling from destroyed buildings. But even in the chaos, Valen knew that victory was within reach. They had the heart, and they would not stop until the Androsians were driven back. Reinforcements! Blake shouted from the front, and Valen's eyes brightened. The sound of more landing pods crashing to the earth filled the air, and human soldiers poured onto the battlefield, bolstering their forces. Valen's pulse quickened as he watched the reinforcements land. This was their chance, their moment to push back. But even as the humans gained ground, the Androsians regrouped. It was clear that this battle was far from over. The Androsians had underestimated humanity before, but this time, it wouldn't be easy. Valen's gaze swept across the horizon, his mind racing. He knew the price of this war. But there was no turning back now. They would fight until the last breath. And when the dust finally settled, it would be humanity's resilience, not the Androsians' might, that would stand victorious. The battlefield stretched out before Valen like a scene from the deepest nightmares. Fires flickered in the distance, casting a ghostly glow over the ruins of what had once been a bustling city. The earth, scorched and scarred, groaned under the weight of the ongoing war. The Vigilance was a distant shadow in the sky now, its engines silent as the crew readied for the final push. It had been hours since reinforcements had landed, but the enemy, ever cunning, still held the upper hand. Valen surveyed the field from behind the shattered remnants of a building. His soldiers were entrenched in their positions, pushing forward inch by inch, but the Androsians weren't retreating. No, they were digging in deeper. Their heavy artillery fire was unrelenting, and the once proud human defenses were crumbling under the pressure. "We're running out of time, Commander," Kara's voice crackled through his comms. "We need to move now or we'll lose the initiative." Valen nodded grimly, his mind racing. The Androsians had expected humanity to break under the strain. They thought that the unyielding spirit of humankind could be crushed beneath the weight of their technological superiority. They thought wrong. "Get the heavy weapons up front," he ordered, turning to Blake. "We're not retreating. We push them back, no matter the cost." Blake gave a sharp salute and barked orders to his squad, but Valen could see the unease in his eyes. They were all tired, physically, mentally, and emotionally drained. Yet, there was no other option. Valen wasn't about to let humanity fall. Not today. As the heavy artillery rumbled into position, the air grew thick with tension. Valen's thoughts flickered briefly to his family. Would he ever see them again? Would anyone? It was a fleeting thought, something to hold on to when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. "Focus, Valen." Kara's voice snapped him out of his reverie. "We've got incoming." A wave of Androsian assault ships swooped in from the sky, their sleek forms cutting through the smoky air like predators descending on their prey. Valen's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "All units, brace for impact," he shouted. "We've trained for this." The human forces rallied, firing at the descending ships with all the firepower they had. Explosions rocked the battlefield as the Androsian ships released their payload, raining down bombs on the human positions. Dirt and debris filled the air as soldiers dove for cover. Valen gritted his teeth, his hands steady on the control pad that governed the defensive turrets. The first wave of bombs was dodged, but there were more incoming. The Androsians had no intention of letting up. A distant thud echoed through the battlefield, followed by a bone-rattling explosion. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and scorched earth. Valen's heart skipped a beat. The blast had come too close. His soldiers were already taking casualties. "Cover them," he shouted, his voice hoarse. He sprinted toward the nearest group of soldiers, his feet crunching against the gravel-strewn ground. There was no time to think, only to act. He dove behind a burnout vehicle and peered around the side. Blake's squad was pinned down by heavy fire from Androsian infantry. They were in a tough spot, but Valen wasn't about to let them go down without a fight. "Blake, hold on!" Valen shouted, raising his rifle and firing in the direction of the enemy. Blake's squad responded, unleashing a hail of gunfire. The enemy soldiers staggered back, but the Androsians were relentless. They were adapted for war, their bodies built for battle, and they had the numbers. "We need to fall back," Blake yelled over the comms, but Valen shook his head. "No. We stay here. We fight. Now." Valen turned to Kara, his eyes locking with hers. "Prepare the final assault." Kara gave him a terse nod. "On your command." The final wave of firepower was unleashed. The earth shook with the force of the barrage as the humans launched everything they had left. Explosions tore through the Androsian ranks, sending their soldiers flying in all directions. For a moment, it felt like the tide was shifting in humanity's favor, but then the ground trembled again, this time, more violently. Valen's heart skipped a beat. "Brace yourselves," he shouted. A massive Androsian warship appeared above them, its engines glowing ominously. The sky seemed to darken as it hovered, casting a long shadow over the battlefield. This wasn't just another ship. This was their command vessel, and with it came the entire Androsian fleet. The odds were now stacked impossibly high. But Valen's gaze hardened as he surveyed his soldiers. There was fear in their eyes, but there was also something else, something powerful. It was the same fire that had been ignited in the hearts of humankind since the first days of their existence. Hope, resilience, defiance. He turned to face the looming vessel. There was no turning back now. "We're not finished," he said quietly, the words steely and resolute. "We fight. Until the end." And so, with humanity's final stand looming before him, Valen made a vow that, no matter the cost, they would never surrender.